along here. And so I'm basically saying, okay, and here's another mushroom here. And sometimes you get a piece of rock and you say, gee, the mushroom's growing there. How do I want to have them like 4 different places? So there's ways of cutting it, putting it in different places. Zoanthia, I'll show you an example of basically how you can cut that apart and trade it, do whatever else, okay? Fairly long as it's fairly damp. The best example of keeping coral out is you get a wet paper towel, saltwater towel, put it on top of it. It probably half hour. I mean, I wouldn't recommend it, but it'll 10 minutes is not a problem. Okay, so basically we're going to start. What I have here is a frag disc type thing, and what I'm going to basically do here is I basically cut a small piece of zoanthia that came off the rock right here. I'm going to leave it out there, no problem. And so typically, the type of glue you get Boston Aqua Farmers one out here, but it's a type of a super glue gel base here. So it's pretty simple. A little dab, as little as possible. The coral will grow over it, but it grows faster on live rock. And then they have a little accelerator. One spray. Push it down like that. It's in the water. 1, 2, 3, 4, 7, 8. Was never good at math. And you're ready to go. And that same principle can also apply to the back of it. Now, when you're buying frags, a lot of times you'll buy it from here, and they'll have this little like nipple on the bottom, and they use that for the frag rack so a snail doesn't knock them over and things like that. But typically in your tank, you really don't want something like that. So I mean, it's really simple to just basically take a pair of pliers, and basically they just snip right off, and then you'll end up gluing it that way. Okay, if you with pliers, again, stainless steel pliers in salt water, you're going to have problems. If it's coated like this, they'll last. I've had these pairs for a couple of years, and they're still sharp and keep going on things like that. So again, some of the times I use there's underwater epoxy too, and what I will do with that is, I'll just give you a quick example. Is I want to glue it on that side for whatever reason in the tank. Okay, so basically what I'll end up doing on something like that, this is a 2-part underwater epoxy, so it's 2 different colors. They have a little purple in here, so a lot of times you can get it at Home Depot, it's all white. This looks a little more attractive in your tank. So you kind of mix that up a little bit, like so. Again, where's my glue? There it is. I put a little glue on there. I'll put this epoxy on like that, because it fills in that porous rock. Put a little bit more there. Give it a little shot there. And I'm going to do this. There's water in here, so basically, all I'm basically doing here is I'm going to put it on a piece of the rock under the water. You kind of press in your tank, count to 3, and basically it'll stick in like that. So if you're buying coral, you're going to lose a lot of it if you don't secure it. Snails constantly knock it over. It goes in your sand bed, things like that. Okay? So I have a lot of questions about soft coral and hard coral. Soft coral is like your zinnias, your various mushrooms, things like that. They generate a lot of mucus. So it's not the easiest coral to basically glue. And most times it stays glued for about 24 hours and you find it drifting away. So basically there's a couple of options you can do. Some people will put a toothpick, if it's thick enough, through a piece of the soft coral. They'll glue the toothpick, like I gave you on the example, to a piece of rock. It'll secure the coral, grow over the toothpick, or it'll dissolve after a while and it'll be secured. Another example is sometimes people use fishing line, and here's a plug that's made for like soft coral, And what you end up doing is you put your soft coral, whatever it is, you can put some kinds of fishing line or whatever that you kind of go over the coral, not super hard, but so you secure it in a low flow area, a couple of weeks, it usually will then secure itself. Another example is you just put the coral maybe in your refugium with a low light where there's a little bit of gravel. Eventually that gravel will adhere to the soft coral. Then you're basically gluing the gravel to the soft coral on something like that. And then one of the best examples is, and I have an example here, as I mentioned to you, this has some mushrooms here, here's another mushroom right here. The best example, I took that little piece off, is just if you can cut it. And there's different ways of doing it. You can use a Dremel saw. This inland bandsaw is kind of a top of the line if you're doing a lot of coral. But what the advantage of that is you basically stuck on that one side. There we go. So I basically ended up, see there's a mushroom right there, and then you can then reattach it that way. I mean, clearly the best way, zoanthias, anything, if you can take a piece of your live rock, and this rock is very porous. I mean, if I with these clippers right here, if it was the right kind of piece, they do break off, and you can cut it along those ways as well. Okay? I kind of jumped ahead. One thing everyone should be doing, and I'm going to cut this up a little bit, and at the end I'll probably give away pieces for those who want to. But you should also dip coral. I don't know how many people dip coral. I mean, the ideal thing is to quarantine it in a tank or whatever, especially if you're dealing with wild coral. There's all sorts of things that can easily survive in the ocean, and you get in your tank, which is a captive area, and you really do have problems. And unfortunately, it never happens with the first piece of coral. It's always when you have a nice tank and everything's going. SBS really is an issue, which are your hard corals. Flatworms are now predominant everywhere. If you're getting coral from Australia, you got a good chance you may have some flatworms in it. You really do need to dip it. And unfortunately, they have eggs too, so the dipping will not kill the eggs. A lot of the other coral, I mean, there's a lot of products out here. Revive's one. We've got various different types. They all seem to work. You'll see a lot of things kind of falling out. It's typically a 5 or 10 minute dip, but you should at least do something along that line. And if not, the ideal scenario is having a small tank where you can quarantine it and make sure things are okay with that. The other product that's a good product to think about is occasionally you'll have a coral and it'll be on a piece of live rock and you'll have some hair algae or something with the coral on the top of it. Hydrogen peroxide is a great product to kill hair algae. So what I end up doing is I'll take a container, I'll fill it up with about that high, I'll dip the rock on it where the coral is still exposed to the air. You can spray it with salt water, whatever, for about 15 minutes, and then afterwards all that hair algae will die off the rock. So if you're having trouble where you have a frag or a zoanthia and you got some algae which really inhibits the growth of the coral, that's another advantage you have in regards to taking care of something like that. Okay, so we'll go through a little bit more on this because everyone likes seeing these things get cut up. So if they start screaming, just put your hands over your ears if for whatever reason you're a little squeamish. Okay, but I'll try to keep the screaming down to a minimum on something like that. But now basically a big piece like this, I'm going to have to kind of figure out what. But this is pretty porous, so a lot of times I can cut this piece right off. Like, wow, this one that was actually kind of, oh, that came off real easy. But anyway, that one came off. So then here I got a couple of mushrooms. If you can see this, they're kind of shrunken, but they're kind of pretty nice. So basically I'm in a position where someone has a blue mushroom and I got a green one, someone has a red one, and I want to be able to trade off. They're very easy to separate on a rock like this. The amazing thing with mushrooms, if you want a lot of them, if you cut them up with like a scalpel, they'll multiply very quickly in the tank. I mean, they're amazing how resilient these coral are. Yeah, see where the mouth is? If I wanted to right here, if I just cut that way and that way, I would end up with 4 mushrooms probably within 3 weeks with all separate mouths.
Do you have to get a piece of the mouth?
It helps, not always, but I would say your success rate increases dramatically by doing that. So basically, though, again, I'm just kind of demonstrating this. So the other thing too, I should be wearing gloves. Be real careful if you have cuts in your hands, especially with zoanthias. They're somewhat toxic, that you can create a little problem. My hands are wet, so there's no way I'll be able to get these guys in there right now. But for example, again, it's amazing how porous these things are. So then you want to basically, again, I'm doing it with this machine. It's a lot easier, but this would clip fairly easily. These rocks are pretty porous. I mean, you can see all the old coral, you have in these different rocks. You can actually, if you had one of these, make your own frags out of it. Although when they're so porous, if you do have any algae problems, they typically create a little bit of a problem when you're done with it. But here we have the zoanthias, and what's nice about these is you may lose a couple of them, but it's amazing how quickly they'll bounce back. So then, and again, you can place it in different ways. You can do this by cutting any other ways if you want to go through something like that. Okay, very simple, not complicated. The key thing to all this, I mean, is fairly good water parameters. If you have good water parameters, it's amazing what they'll do. But another example with the zoanthias that a lot of people will do is if you have a scalpel like this, you'll see like a little matting right here, and you just kind of, and if it's an expensive one, right here, there's a couple little polyps, you kind of glue it, and unfortunately or fortunately, depending on what side of the table you are, that could be $20 type of thing. I mean, if they get a valuable piece like that, I mean, that's what they end up doing. I mean, you see them out there and things like that. So that's another way of doing it. But if you can get a piece of the matting of the zoanthia, your success rate will go way up on something like that. So again, this is really basic, and then I'm kind of opening it up for questions and answers.
What about cauliflower?
Actually, they're relatively easy. Even scullies, people cut and they bounce.
I mean,
back.
like if you had a whole column branch of it, you slice off a branch and you want to keep it on the rock.
I think I always prefer leaving a piece on the rock because I know it's secure. It takes a little longer to when you cut it, and a toothpick or all those other examples.